Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the Legislative and Advocacy Committee meeting for Tuesday, June 25th. It's been a while since we've been here, so we'll call this meeting to order. Ms. Hammond will be taking the minutes, and so instead of just taking a formal roll, once again, if we could just go around the table and introduce yourself and tell your role. I think we've all been here before, so start with you, Ms. Banks.
Well, good afternoon. Angie Banks. I am the Chief Financial Officer.
Carla Dozier, Chief of HR Compliance.
Myra Berry, Chief of HR Operations.
Manala Lansi, Chief of Staff.
Superintendent Keisha Scarlett.
I'm Matt Davis, Vice President of the Board of Education and Chair of this committee.
Steve Carroll, the lobbyist for the district.
Tracy Fantini, Co-Chair of the Parent Action Council.
Well, thank you all for coming out on this nice blustery day. So we're very fortunate to have Mr. Carroll here live and in the flesh. It was another very busy but yet not productive, perhaps, legislative session. So he'll be joining us tonight with the work session to give another report on the legislative session, but we wanted to have him here so members of this committee can ask him questions. So, Mr. Carroll, if you want to give us
Well, thank you.
Overview.
Appreciate being here on the hottest day of the year. Forgive me for not being in a suit and tie, but I'm cool and casual today, so it works out a lot better. I can tell you the past legislative session was a historic session in a way. I mean, not a lot got done. It was chaotic. Those of you that received my weekly reports or in the session reports realize that it was just the craziest session that I had witnessed in my 40 years, either as a legislator or a lobbyist. When I say historic, there were more bills filed than ever before. Over 2,600 bills were filed, and yet it was historic low that only 28 bills, other than the appropriation bills, made it across the finish line. So that shows you how chaotic it was, basically because of the antics of the so-called Freedom Caucus in the Senate, where you had 5 senators, Republican senators, that constantly fought with Republican leadership in the Senate. Usually you see the Democrats and Republicans go at each other, but the Democrats sat back this year in the Senate and just watched the Freedom Caucus argue and go after the Republican leadership. And so, like I said, not a lot got done. There were literally days in the Senate when nothing got done other than a 15-minute filibuster, and they just retired for the rest of the day. So I've just never seen anything quite like it. So if you wanted to kill legislation, this was certainly the year to do it. That is for sure. But overall, from an education standpoint, I think we did pretty well overall. I mean, there were a lot. I was tracking over 500 pieces of legislation dealing with education alone. There were a lot of bad things that could have happened. You had the critical race theory legislation. You had the Parents' Bill of Rights that were very bad, that districts could be sued, or school board members or school personnel could be sued if things went wrong. You had statewide open enrollment. You had charter schools statewide. You had the voucher program that was just unbelievable. You even had a legislation that wanted to give homeschoolers the same amount of money that went through the formula as the SAT, which would have just broken the budget. So those things we were able to stop. As far as some of the good things, I mean, we got full funding in the foundation formula for the 3rd year in a row. We were able to get full funding for the transportation formula, which is huge, certainly for this district, but certainly for a lot of outstate districts as well. We had increases in the early childhood education. And so we also were able to get the $2.5 million appropriation for our reading literacy program for the 4th year in a row. So that's a total of $10 million that we've been able to get that the district didn't really even ask for. So it was just kind of icing on the cake to help us with our programs. Now next year, with the new Commissioner of Education coming in, a new governor, certainly a new speaker, potentially a new chairman of the Senate Appropriations, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get that appropriation again. I think it's probably 50-50, but at least we were able to get it for 4 years. The one bill that did pass was the big omnibus education bill, Senate Bill 727. I will say this about Andrew Koenig, who was the former chair of the Senate Education Committee. He was stripped of his committee chairmanship because he was a member of the Freedom Caucus, and so Senate leadership took it away from him. But Senate leadership, being Caleb Rowden from Columbia, Missouri, the president pro tem of the Senate, who was a big education choice advocate, he let Andrew Koenig continue to be the sponsor of this bill because the president pro tem wanted charter schools in Boone County in Columbia, Missouri, his home city. And so I'll say this about Andrew Koenig, he is a heck of a deal maker. And he knows how to count votes, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get the Democrats in the Senate on board with this bill, even though it had vouchers in it, and even though it had some expansion of charter schools. What he did, though, was he had to take his voucher program, he took it down to only a $25 million increase in it from 50 to 75 million. However, under the current law, the 50 million, they're only using about 17 million of that so far, so they haven't even got to the 50 million. So it's going to take them years, I think, to get up to the 75, even though they expanded it. And then he was willing to take the statewide charter school expansion down to just Boone County. To offset that, though, he was willing to give away a huge amount to public schools in the state. And so in the bill, you have the increased funding through the formula to increase of 1% if you do a 169-day, 5-day school week. That would go up to 2% after the third year. Also, you change the way the weighted average daily attendance now will include student enrollment. That will take 5 years to fully implement, but when it does, you're talking about an extra $75 million through the foundation formula. And then one of the biggest deals was also the early childhood education increase, currently from the 4% cap on free and reduced lunch, taking it up to 8%. That's a $61 million increase through the formula, and that's not subject to appropriation. That's mandated in the formula. So there were many other issues in the bill as well, but it did pass. The Senate Democrats sat down on it, didn't filibuster it, and the governor signed it. So now I think moving forward, since when it's fully funded, it's a $478 million fiscal note, so almost $500 million. I think our first priority should be in our legislative platform for next year moving forward is to fully fund 727. They passed it, we need to fully fund it. So that's kind of just a quick overview, Mr. Chairman, of what occurred. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but that's where we're at.
Questions for Mr. Carroll? So in terms of the appropriations, just to be clear, so the part of 727 that you talked about in terms of the weighted daily average for 5 years, free and reduced lunch is in there, so that's not subject to appropriations. The other ones that are subject to appropriations. So the legislature can only appropriate year to year. So
Yeah.
these things that are 5 years down the road, it's going to take the legislature 5 years from now to remember, oh, we passed that in 727, and that was really important. We cut these deals. People made promises to each other. But 5 years from now, you're probably going to have completely different legislators that may not remember it. So how do we approach that in terms of making sure that that's funded, not just 2-3 years from now, but actually when it all goes into 100% effect?
Right. Well, that's, you have to have institutional memory and knowledge, and I guess that's where the lobbyist comes in to remind the legislators that you did in fact pass this and needs to be funded. I think, though, getting it started in year one, making sure they fund it so you get it in the core. And so DESE is requesting that through the core, and then the governor will sign off on that core. And that certainly makes it easier than just coming in and saying we want a new line item. So I think the key is to make sure that we get it funded fully that first year, and then as it keeps moving forward, we keep it in the core. So, I mean, there are provisions in the bill that are subject to appropriation, like the increase in the teacher salaries, the minimum wage from the 25 to 40, but we're already currently above that. But what's going to happen, though, if we get into serious problems down the road, that grant for the teacher salary may not be funded, and then it's all going to shift to the local school districts. They're going to have to come up with the funds, so that's what you got to worry about. when they're not subject to appropriations, so.
Other questions for Ms. Carroll, Ms. Banks?
Thank you for the update. You know, fantastic that they are funding up to 8% of pre-K students. I guess I'm just wondering, are the same provisions in there, if you recall? I know that seems like the free and reduced lunch applications were part of what families had to provide in the past, which is very difficult to do. and-
Right. They didn't change any of the procedures. They just simply took the cap up from 4% to 8%.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought.
And how do we do that since we don't do free and reduced lunch? We do the community provision?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. Oftentimes, I believe it's the family community specialists that have been providing a lot of support and reaching out to families, and, you know, it's quite a task to get that done.
So we still have to collect the information somehow for these other benefits, but we don't have to do it in terms of food service.
Yes, correct.
Got it. So if you had your crystal ball, Mr. Carroll, what may be on the horizon for next year? Is it just more of the
More of the
same,
same,
or-
open enrollment, that they're going to push that big time, without a doubt. And probably the expansion of charter schools in St. Louis County, St. Charles County, and Jackson County, I would say would be, at this point, top on their agenda. But without a doubt, open enrollment.
Any other questions for Mr. Carroll? Well, thank you, sir, and we'll see you again tonight. I'm sure there'll be more questions from the full board as well. So I did want to move into discussion of our potential 2025 legislative priorities. I don't think we need to decide today, but I always like to just sort of put these topics out there so if people need to think about it or research it or discuss it in other venues. As you know, our legislative priorities for the past 3 years have included advocating for trauma support. It's also been advocating for students in transition, our unhoused students. We also, last year, included a provision to advocate for additional accountability measures, feasibility measures, and the addition of new charter schools. Those have been the three sort of bedrock principles. The first two have been, since the formation of this committee, the other one has sort of come and go. It took over the funding of the 1552 issue. I did want to just talk about three other ideas that have sort of come around this year, and we can talk about whether we want to substitute them or add to our legislative priorities. The first one, of course, Mr. Carroll, being the fully funding of the provisions in 727. I think that that's probably an absolute necessity to include that, and I'm sure we'll be working with our other sort of educational advocates around the state to make sure that happens, MSBA and the other organizations as well. The next two are kind of new. So the next one we've sort of discussed. We sort of discussed it a little bit in the subcommittee. Dr. Scarlett had it in her last presentation to the board to some extent about special education funding. One idea that I would like to explore, and I want to get some thoughts about how we can go about that, maybe creating a work group to sort of begin to analyze it, because I do think there is a window of opportunity that we can pursue this if we're interested in. And that is in terms of special education funding. So last year there were two sort of placeholder bills that were introduced. One was to allow the city to introduce either a sales tax or a property tax for funding of special education. And doing a little more research, looking at sort of existing legislation, there is a provision in the law that allows for for really any area of voters to create a special school district, exactly like is in the St. Louis County. It's the same law that they used. But in looking at it, it could apply to us. We could petition, well, a group of citizens could petition to have it put on the ballot to create a special school district. And because our county, city is a county, is all one school district, it would actually be sort of easy to create in terms of the legislative mechanism, and that we're only dealing with one school district that takes up the whole county. So, it's a bit of a complicated statute. It's also very old. I mean, most of it, I think, is from the 70s. It's been very rarely updated. So that starts in 162.825 of the Missouri statutes on how to create it, and then there's other provisions as well. What that would do, so generally speaking, the way to do it, a group of citizens in the county, St. Louis City, would have to sign a petition that would be submitted to DESE. It's 5% of the total number of votes in the last school board election. That would be about, if we did it now, that would be about a little over 2,000 signatures. That petition is sent to DESE. DESE authenticates that it's a valid petition, and then they direct the Board of Education in the city to put it on the ballot at the next school board election, which is at this point April 2025. That immediately authorizes, if the voters approve it, creation of a special school district, and that special school district, once created, and there's a couple of ways that the governing body of that is created, which we don't have to get into, could then assess a property tax of 0.25%. That's the initial amount that's in the statute, and then of course that special school district can always go to the voters to increase that levy. So that's a mechanism that seems to possibly have some viability. I mean, obviously there's some steps to create it. There's then going to have to be some questions of, how the infrastructure of that is built out. Now, there will be a separate governing body, but that governing body also answers to representatives from the Board of Education of all the school districts in that county. There's only one school district in the county of the city of St. Louis, so in essence, there's a very strong interplay between the Special School District Board and the Board of Education. So they sort of have a symbiotic relationship in that. And, in the county, every school district that participates has a representative on that school board, but then there's also they elect 7 members of the school board, but there's also a governing council that they respond to. So that would be a little different in our area. So anyway, that's a little bit of the logistics about it. I guess right now I'm looking for people's reaction, but I'm also looking maybe for some thoughts or ideas about how we could create a work group to examine that in a time frame, maybe to come back to this committee to report on that. So I'll open that up.
Have we figured in on the 0.25 how much revenue that would bring in?
I want to say it's probably about 20 million.
So when you say 0.25, are we talking 25 cents? Is that what you're saying?
I knew
Isn't
you were
that
going to ask me this.
1/4 of 1%?
Yeah. So I think in other, again, this is me and I'm terrible at this, but looking at that, I mean, depending, it's like around between 18 and 20 million on other taxes that have that same amount. Does that sound right? Kind of? Well, again, this will also be something that I think the work group would have to examine.
Right, yeah. But, yeah, we've got those numbers. We can figure out what that might be.
Yeah, and that's the cap that once the district is created, that's the cap that board can go up to in their assessment. If they need to go higher, they have to go, and so the special school district has gone to voters and has a higher levy than that. But that would be the initial, with the creation, that's what it would be. So that's another question. I mean, is that even enough to start a district and everything that it would need? Or, is that enough to at least get things started and see what the impact is? Because, I mean, we certainly don't want to ask voters to do something that we don't know what we're going to do with and isn't going to be feasible.
Yeah, well, I certainly was not aware of that, in the statute, so that's, I guess, very positive. And I'd certainly like to do some initial, kind of just groundwork to
Right.
see what that might look like.
It would be easier to use that statute than trying to pass a new piece of legislation. Because, I mean, as I look at this under the statute, a charter school is not considered a district. And so the charter schools would not be able to participate in this unless they change the statute. So the question is then, you know, if you put it on the ballot and the charters weren't involved with it, where would they be on this? And so it just makes for interesting.
Yeah, and I guess it really depends on, you know, again, being so unaware of it, is like, who would this district serve? But it sounds like it would serve the entire city of St. Louis,
It would
including
serve.
the charters, so.
Yeah, I mean, so certainly the statute was written before charter schools were
Charters,
ever, and it operates really only in St. Louis County where there are no charter schools. So it's, the way that they function is very different than how we would do it if charter schools were to participate. But the way the statute is, it doesn't sound like that's the case. Now, I mean, just like we can, the special school district contract with us for certain services, or you can contract with other services for special ed, that isn't a provision. So charter schools could enter into some sort of contractual relationship with a special school district for certain things. And then it's also important to note that the special school district statute, it is for special education services and also vocational training services. So we know the special school district also has North and South Tech in St. Louis County as vocational training as well. So it's not just, you know, typically what we define as traditional special ed for special needs students. It also is for vocational training too.
What kind of a time frame would we be looking at as far as when you would want the work group to report back and when we might look at getting this on the ballot, if that indeed happens?
So if we can, so it's, what is it? We'll call it July. I think if I recall, the statute says once the signatures are turned in, DESE has 60 days to send that to the school district to tell them to do it. So the deadline to get on the April ballot is probably January. So working back 60 days, you'd have to be in November. So I think I'd like the work group to be done. I'd like something in a month, really. So if there's, you know, we can talk to people and see if they're interested in signature gathering. I don't think it'd take long to get 2,000 signatures, but you could do that in August, September. You know, send that to DESE, and if you're looking at the April ballot.
Certainly on get back to school, you know, when parents start getting together, I think it'd be easy to gather their signatures around that time.
Yeah, I don't think 2,000 signatures would be very difficult at all. So it sounds like Chief Banks, you're volunteering for this work group. Dr. Scarlett, do you have any other nominations?
I nominate myself. And not another nomination, but I did want to mention that I spoke with the superintendent, Michael Macklin, a special school district, and he's willing and able to help us in any way possible, just structurally around this. So we just met when I saw him last week in Jefferson City. So. Candace Boyd.
Oh, yeah. Tracy, do you think anybody from the PAC, a person or two, may be interested in, and you don't have to, you know, do this on the, but maybe if you want to put a feeler out?
Yes. Absolutely, we can do that, as well as assist with gathering signatures.
Yeah. And there's nobody here from the union today, but I wonder if someone from AFT might want to be involved as well.
Sure, and I'll be there whenever you meet.
Excellent. Yes, thank you.
So I'll reach out to President Cummings.
Okay, so Chief Banks and Dr. Scarlett, you're going to lead this effort, and we will have some sort of thoughts and considerations, proposals, additional questions in a month.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much. And finally, I do just want to throw this out there. and we've avoided this before, but it does seem like, and maybe I've just been thinking about this more, is we've avoided the topic of putting on our legislative priorities anything to do with gun regulation. We've sort of couched it in trauma support. But I do just think, with the recent media reports and revelations, Dr. Scarlett and I had gone and met with the teachers at CVPA and CSMB right at the end of school, that we do probably need to consider putting on our priorities some sort of legislation for extreme risk orders of protection. There's been a national at the Department of Justice, a new office regarding gun violence. They have all these new resources gathering information about states with these sort of extreme risks order of protection. A lot of people call them red flag laws. I think they're changing the topics because it's really very specific to people that have a very demonstrable threat, and making sure that due process is followed, but also making sure that there is due process for the community as well, who is under threat from people who are should not be owning and possessing these guns. So I do just want to throw that out as a possible topic. I know it is a hard, heavy lift in Jefferson City. We certainly avoided jumping right into it after October 24th, but I think that enough time has passed and reflection has passed. We can't say that we're just doing this as a knee-jerk reaction. I think after sort of studying the situation, sort of contemplating about, what could have been different, it's just a glaringly obvious, very simple, easy fix that at least half of the states have adopted that, probably could have prevented that tragedy.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I think it should be part of our legislative package. We can't close our eyes to this anymore. It may be different in outstate Missouri, but we got issues here in the city of St. Louis that we have to deal with. And that should be on it, period.
Any other thoughts about our other three topics? And if we want to go to six, because at least the special ed is kind of a locally thing. The fully funded is going to be, a statewide effort, I imagine, with all of our partners. Trauma support and homeless support. I know we've certainly done some good work on this committee with the homeless support, and I don't want to take them away. I know the trauma really hasn't gotten off the ground, and so what do we think about where we are with our other priorities, what we can do, if we're doing too much and need to sort of let some go away, or if we need to redouble some efforts?
Well, I might throw out, it may not be a top priority, but it should be, we should bullet point in our platform that we are willing to look for solutions in dealing with the retirement system and working with them. A common sense fix, just so it shows that we are in fact engaged in trying to do something, because legislation will be there next year, so I don't think it hurts to put it in.
And I do think I testified under oath that we would do that
Yeah,
in the
you did.
Senate, if you recall. So that wasn't recorded, but we did make that promise. So yeah, that is absolutely. We are going to have something that we've agreed upon by the next legislative session for the retirement system. It's just sort of a reminder. There was something that sort of snuck in last year that we had to go up and try to put the brakes on, that the retirement system put in there to take us to a funding level that we had not seen before, that we had not agreed to, and that really we hadn't analyzed, and really seemed to take us in a step back from where we had come. But recognizing also that they are in a situation that is somewhat precarious. I mean, they're stable for quite a while. I mean, they're stable, but not funded at an amount that I think people are comfortable with, certainly for stability. So that's going to take some additional contributions from the district, and we need to talk about additional contributions from the employees as well. And so we'll be meeting with the retirement board and doing some work on that. But that, yeah, absolutely, from a legislative priority, that's going to take legislation. And the hope is when we go back in January, that there'll be a bill that all parties agree with.
I see housing and trauma as something that's ongoing. I don't think that we can leave it off of our priority agenda. And I definitely like the idea of adding something in about a red flag law, because it honestly feels like we're doing nothing. Even if it's a non-starter with this legislature, I think it needs to be there.
Extreme risk order of protection, we'll be calling it. Words
Pardon me.
sometimes matter. So like once the red flag law is like, well, triggering everybody, not to use that phrase, but
Pardon
so
me.
the language has evolved and seems to be getting more successful because it, and it is probably a more accurate description of what we'd be asking for. And so that may be more palatable, but yeah, no, I agree. All right, well, we probably in a future meeting then will especially when we kind of have a little downtime from all these other big lifts, kind of fill in with the housing and the trauma and really talk about maybe where we need to focus. When we first started out, we really tried to sort of address local stakeholders, and it may be time to sort of revisit that. Because I just feel like it needs to be forefront, and we put it on there because we felt that it was sort of our obligation, since it's such a major factor with so many of our families. All right, well, if there's nothing further on that, I don't know if there's anybody who was here representing a subcommittee that has any reports. I know Dr. Borsche kind of turned in her homework a while ago on that. So are there any subcommittee reports, as President Cousins sneaks in the back on another call, as she does?
The trauma committee has no report at this time.
Hello, President Cousins. Not to put you on the spot, but do you have any reports from the housing subcommittee? I thought you did.
Yes, I do have a report. We have been working diligently on one of the recommendations that was provided. I know we had spoken about the housing concerns that we have. It was brought to the legislative committee as well as in the citywide plan. One of the biggest concerns was the district has over 500 unaccompanied youth that are challenged with housing. One of the plans that we have put in action was looking at one of our schools from our infrastructure aspect and how do we repurpose our facilities, any of our unused facilities. One of the schools that have been identified at this point is Northwest School. We have had talks. There has been various applications that have been put in. We have temporarily been awarded. We don't know, it's a early awarding, but we still have to go through other processes. But I can honestly say, and I'm proud to say, that the Housing Committee has submitted for the community, the federal community grant. We were pre-awarded $4.25 million to do a 51 bed unit for Northwest School. It will be half, the goal is for it to be half of that facility would be residential for our youth. We will be partnering with another entity that will actually oversee that component, and the other component of that facility will actually be providing resources for all within the community, again, which is what has been in alignment with what fell up under the housing component of the legislative committee. We are working to identify additional fundings as well as partners to launch the resources that will be provided in there. This all, again, came from what was asked from the citywide plan, from the infrastructure and the health and safety components of the recommendations that came out of that. So we're still working diligently to move forward with that. We have identified the different partnerships that we will be working with. So I'm happy to say, with the help of Gloria Nolan, Ms. Erin, Dr. Deidre Thomas Murray, and the committee that we have really been working to move that project forward.
So what's the process in that grant? So I know, they've made the announcement that it's pre-funded. Do they wait then for like congressional appropriation?
Yes, it must go through the congressional appropriation process. I'm sure with our lobbyist, Mr. Curls, he can kind of give us more insight. It's pretty much the same that we do on the state level. Now it's just on the federal level. We've gone through the stages of it, filling out the application, doing all the preliminaries of what was asked from Congresswoman Bush that we needed. We did all of those stages, everything that was asked of us in regards to the application process. We were able to complete it and successfully completed everything that was needed. So now it will go before the congressional elected officials to actually vote to say what that pool of money will be approved for. So hopefully come the next session, if they don't change anything, that it will be approved. That's a good question, Vice President Davis. And to be clear, the funds that have been approved for this particular project is just the infrastructure dollars, and that's to do the renovation of the facility. They will not be providing funding to do the social service aspect of it. Congresswoman Bush made that very clear that those funds will not be allocated by any means from this House of officials that they have, that they're only moving to provide support for infrastructure dollars. So.
That's amazing. Any questions? Any other updates? All right, well, our last matter of business is to talk about the schedule. I was kind of looking at the calendar, and I wonder if our next, that's the wrong month. If we could look at July 30th as a possible date, and I don't know if this time works for everyone, or if there's a better time. All right, well, let's just pencil it in with no objections for July 30th at noon. All right. All right, well, if there's nothing further, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.